It's November 18, 2024. I'm Gloria Nussbaum, and I'm talking with Tom Smucker of Sterling, Ohio, via Zoom about his involvements with Mennonite Disaster Service. Tom, I'm delighted that you're able to be with me, and I look forward to hearing some of your stories. We're going to start at the very beginning. When and how did you first learn about Mennonite Disaster Service?
Basically all my life, but I became actively involved in 1992. Hurricane Andrew in Louisiana.
So you basically learned about it from your family and in your church, I'm guessing.
Correct.
What was the impetus for you saying, yes, I want to go on that first assignment?
I don't know, just wanting to serve. I had served with MCC previously, so serving was not new.
Tell me about arriving at that first assignment. First of all, how did you get there?
Drove. There's four of us, kind of, I'd call that a carload for that distance to Louisiana. So the four of us went down as just regular volunteers to the Houma area in Louisiana.
What kinds of skills did you have that made you think that you might be able to be of service?
Well, I've been in construction most of my life, adult life, and farming background, which means I could probably do about anything.
Tell me a bit about that first assignment. Again, it was in Louisiana, and what were you responding to?
Hurricane Andrew. 1992, Andrew came across Florida. Homestead came off the coast and then headed up to Louisiana and hit the coastline there in Louisiana.
So by the time you got there, had there already been some cleanup done, or give us a little idea of what the picture was like when you landed there?
Boy, I believe Andrew hit in August, and I think we went in October. So we were doing a lot of roof work, repair work. Actually, we're still setting up the living site.
And what was that? Where were you staying?
Oh, boy, I think that was Franklin. Boy, you're pushing me now.
Was it in a church building? Was it?
It was an old armory building, just pretty much a shell when we got there.
And did you know how long you would be there when you said you
We went for 2 weeks because of the distance.
Were you able to have any interaction with the people whose houses you were repairing, or talk just a bit about that whole first experience?
Boy, I don't remember much of that.
I mean, was it surprising? Were you shocked? Were you, no, this is what I expected? Or
No, I don't shock very easily. That's pretty much what one would expect. We did a fair amount of work on the base camp too, so the exposure wasn't always with clients.
So you were some of the very first volunteers that had gone?
I would say so, yeah. I wasn't involved in those behind-the-scene actions at that point.
That experience obviously led you to further involvement. At this point in your life, were you in a position where you could just kind of take some time off, or explain a bit about your life circumstances at this point?
Yeah, I had numerous farms going up here, and I sold one of them, poultry farm. And I didn't have the heart to fire the guy that was running that for me, so moved him to my home place, which gave me spare time to do some things. And the other connection was my wife, Kathy, worked for MCC Great Lakes at that point in Kidron, and was working with Lowell Detweiler, who then was the executive coordinator, I believe, at that point. I think he had an MCC title instead of an MDS title.
So was this the time when those two organizations were starting to be separate entities? Or?
That's correct. 92, 93. From Louisiana as a 2-week, I went to a workshop with Lowell, back to Louisiana. Then working with Lowell, I can give my wife credit or blame her because she connected with Lowell very well. And at that point, we were asked then to, in 93, to run the homestead project for the summer youth. So I took 3 or 4 of my children. I have 5 children. I think we took 3 along to Homestead for the summer of 93. And then kept getting more and more involved with Lowell and MDS. And those were kind of tough times for MDS as we were separating, trying to learn how to be an organization on our own. And so I assisted and had numerous meetings at Akron with him and others to get our things going. And then after 93, that was when the floods hit Mississippi and Manitoba, the Red River and the Mississippi River. And he asked me to go out there and ride around with some guys for a while. And I just kept getting deeper and deeper into MDS.
So just to give some geography to some of these, because I know what you mean, but we want others to know. When you say Homestead, you're talking about Homestead, Florida.
Correct.
And what had happened there?
Hurricane Andrew hit there first, crossed the state of Florida into the Gulf, got juiced up again, and hit Louisiana.
And when you say Akron, you're talking about Akron, Pennsylvania.
Correct. That was when MDS still had the MCC desk.
MDS actually came about through Mennonite Central Committee. So when you became the executive director after Lowell retired, or being the executive director, did that mean that you needed to move to Akron, Pennsylvania? Or tell me a little bit about that whole process for you.
Yeah, I worked 6 years for Lowell out of Ohio, my home base, which was then Smithville. And he would send me on assignments. Most of the time I was the field guy to go out with the regional directors or state coordinators and investigate disasters, wherever that might be. I did that for 6 years. In the early part of those 6 years is when we tried to organize MDS into a viable organization.
Talk a bit about some of the challenges when you were working at that. And I'm assuming that by this time you are paid staff.
No.
You're still a volunteer.
Yes. I didn't get paid for 6 years, I don't believe.
So how were you able to, you have a family. What's the story?
Well, my farm was doing well. As I said, I moved one employee back to the home farm, and he basically did the work.
Again, tell me what some of the challenges were during those 6 years as the two organizations were becoming separate entities, as you recall.
Probably the same challenges then as they are now, leadership. As you set up projects, you had to identify leaders, project directors, crew leaders, head cooks, those kind of things. That's always been a challenge. That doesn't change. The biggest difference between then and now is we're much more highly organized and have some funds to work with now. We had very, very little funds back then. Keeping equipment going and stuff. Basically, volunteers brought their own tools, used their own vehicles. It was very, very grassroots like it was in 1950 when it started.
And MCC had a few more staff than MDS did at that point, but both of those organizations still are very much volunteer-oriented. Do you think that's a piece of what made things a little bit more challenging than maybe they might have been?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
MDS is becoming its own organization, but like you say, it's still associated with MCC. But in setting up this organization and leadership, you're still counting on people to volunteer. And that can be a challenge when some people needed to make money.
Well, you still have that issue now. You still have your volunteers.
But MDS has paid staff at this point, too.
Lots of staff.
That's part of what I'm trying to get at, was at that point, that was not the case.
No. I think there might have been Lowell and maybe an administrative assistant at that point. And let's see, Marilyn would have been there. Maybe a part-time, I don't know, what do we call them back then? Secretary, assistant, I don't know.
An office person.
He might have had, I'm not even sure Lowell was full-time yet in 92. I think he was on the MCC payroll.
In the meantime, you are very much involved with MDS. I would love to hear just a couple of stories from that time or any time of maybe the clients that you were working with, the volunteers, the challenges of finding volunteers, or some interesting things that have happened. And I hear you were also involved with Harvey, and you talked also about things up in Canada. So give me some stories, please.
Not very good at that.
Memories.
Memories, now, I don't know if they're stories. One of the things you have to understand, I basically ended up in more administrative roles than client, volunteer, project director roles. So my stories aren't necessarily your typical, yeah, I met Mary in her house, and that's not has been or ever was my role. My role was basically working with communities, getting projects setting up, finding funding. That was a big issue early on, coordinating with other agencies, Red Cross, Salvation Army, United Way, whatever that community had at that disaster. So that was more my role than actually individual stories working with them. Those people who stayed on site, that's when those relationships developed in the stories that are typically told.
But you've had some experiences, even just like you just said, working with other agencies, that kind of thing. Talk a bit about that. I think it's a piece that we often don't think about, and it's important.
One that comes to mind has been Hurricane Marilyn. I can't tell you when that was. Hit the Virgin Islands. Lowell sent me down there. I was the first MDSer on those islands. I met with a pastor in Puerto Rico, and I'm sorry I can't pull back his name. He was going to go with me over to St. Thomas, where the main hurricane hit, and I had to rent a private plane to get over because commercial flights were all canceled. The terminal at the airport was blown out. The National Guard was bringing planes in with walkie-talkies. And it was very interesting. I had had experience in other disasters up to that point. And when you see your first disaster, which is still true today, it really takes you back. You just kind of stand there, your jaw drops, and you just marvel at the destruction. And I had gone through this numerous times before. And so when we got out of that little bitty plane, this pastor, who I expected to take the lead, took 2 steps backward and hardly spoke another word the rest of the day. He was so taken back by the destruction. You're on a tropical island that's full of vegetation, and he lived in Puerto Rico, so he was used to that very green, lush vegetation, and all that was left was the limbs of the trees or the bushes, and all the lush was gone. And that always just amazed me, how one, and I don't want to say gets accustomed to it, but you work with disaster situations and you just know what to expect. And being with this person who did not have any experience was really taken back by that, by the devastation. That's one that I've always remembered, because that's still true when you take somebody new. The last disaster I was at was in Kentucky with a tornado, and you take first timers to see the devastation. They're almost speechless because of the destruction. So that's still true today. You have to, and you can't train that. That's something you just have to be part of.
And I'm sure that seeing these things, quote unquote, in person is very different from the pictures we see on TV.
Oh, absolutely. The smell, you don't understand the smell of destruction. Particularly in the flood, you've got a lot of volunteers that help clean out, muck out, we call basements, et cetera, that when the refrigerator opens, it's been closed for 2 months. The smells, that kind of stays with you for days. So yeah, the TV, that just doesn't cut it after you've seen it personally.
So did you end up actually setting up a unit there on the island?
Oh yeah, St. Thomas. Sure, we were there a couple of years, I believe. I don't quite remember. I was there about a day or two, and it was my task to find a place to house volunteers. Worked very closely with FEMA. I think it was just FEMA at that point because it was off mainland. I had found a nursing home that the roof was 3/4 blown off, and I worked with the administrators of that, and we took that building over, covered it with a blue roof, and lived there for a while. You're in the tropics, so you didn't have to worry about the cold weather. Many volunteers slept on cots in the parking lot. Those first few weeks were really a struggle because, the infrastructure was gone. Still, roads weren't open. Food was a big issue. I recall, again, one of my first exposures, you flew in meals, and then the National Guard would distribute it throughout the island. And what really struck me was that you had National Guard folks sitting on top of the trucks, heavily armored, so that they wouldn't steal the food before it got to its location. That's kind of a memorable thing. The other thing, we didn't have any vehicles. So at one of the agency meetings, I got up and says, "Is there any vehicles anywhere that we can rent or borrow or use?" And this guy come and said, "Yeah, you can have my car, but it's under 2 feet of brick." The house chimney kind of fell on it, and the house, it was a mess, stone. So the first job when our volunteers got there was to clean the roof off of the car. And I remember volunteers telling me they got inside, laid on their back, and kicked the roof up, and the thing actually started, and away they went. So that was our vehicle for a while. So, those are some of the experiences that most people don't see.
And it sounds like, or I would assume or guess, that working on an island has specific challenges, as you've just noted. You can't just drive in.
Right. Getting some of our vehicles there, we had to wait for FEMA to load them on ships and get them over, or barges, whatever it was. Back in those days, we didn't have much equipment to begin with. So, yeah, all the material was flown into the airport in containers, and only certain agencies were allowed into the airport to get material to take out. We worked on a lot of temporary housing there in the beginning.
And did the MDS volunteers need to fly in just as you had, or how did they get there?
I'm not sure how they got there. Can't remember that one.
It's always surprising to me when I hear MDS people say, "I had to take a private plane," or "we got on with the military," or things like that I think the ordinary person in the pew doesn't even think about.
Well, and that's the stuff that has to happen up front. If you want to be disaster response agency, you need to get there early, especially with the skills that MDS brings. Like I said, we did a lot of temporary housing. I remember, particularly in St. Thomas, there's always an issue of getting back to normal, whatever normal is after a hurricane. People were being housed in schools and auditoriums and things like that. And, after a couple, 3 weeks, government wants to get the school back open so you can return normal with the children. And so we helped FEMA and Red Cross do some temporary housing so we could move the people out of the shelters. So those are some of the early upfront kind of things you did. And like you say, island experience is totally different than mainland.
And that was before cell phones and that kind of thing. How did you communicate with Lowell or with Akron or with MDS headquarters?
Well, it was Lowell. That's all we had. I used the FEMA infrastructure. They set up temporary phones on the mountaintops there in St. Thomas and used military to get back to the States. I don't know how it worked, but it worked.
But generally speaking, it was telephone.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's the point I was trying to make.
In those days, we were talking shortwave, walkie-talkies, none of this fancy stuff.
That was the point I wanted.
No GPS. I was talking with somebody the other day. For example, Hurricane Andrew in Florida, Homestead, Dade County. We didn't have GPS. You were given an address in a general area. Well, there again, many of the street signs are gone. So how do you find 1032 Southwest when there's no street signs? You could spend hours trying to find a client in those days. And I just kind of chuckle today that they just plug the numbers in, away we go.
At some point, you took over Lowell's job.
98.
Tell me how that came about.
Well, 98, let's see. Yeah, Lowell wanted to step down. He wanted to write his book, and that was getting ready for the 50th year anniversary. And so I wouldn't say he quit. He just kind of stepped aside to do his work and do what you're doing, interviews and travel around talking to people and things like that. And I just happened to be available. Again, that goes back to I had people covering my work at the farm, and so I could kind of pick up and go. I lived 1 year in Akron by myself. My family stayed, and my youngest daughter graduated from high school that year, and so my wife and family stayed in Smithville area, and I was kind of a transit person, lived a little bit in Akron, a little bit in Ohio, and a lot on the road.
And after 1 year, what happened?
My wife and youngest daughter moved out there, and my daughter went to Millersville College.
So you did end up living in Akron for some years, or in the area.
I actually lived in Lititz, but worked out of Akron, right? Correct.
Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Correct.
How long were you executive director?
6 years. Those 6 years, we actually bought an office, the old post office in Akron, Pennsylvania. We purchased that, and we were in the old Highland building, MCC Square of Akron there. We were renting some spots, or I don't know if we were renting or an MCC gave it to us. I'm not remember. But it was tight. We added another staff person or so for communications and things like that. And I do remember it was extremely tight. I would have to go to lunch, and then the folks could open the file cabinets like behind you, because my chair was in front of those file cabinets, and so I had to go to lunch so they could do filing. And we figured we needed a little more space. So at that point, the board said, go ahead, and we purchased that building, turned it into offices.
The Akron Post Office. That's
the Akron Post Office. The old Akron Post Office was where our first floor offices, and the upstairs was bedrooms and a kitchen. So when we invite leadership in, they could stay there. That's before MCC had all their nice, convenient facilities.
You were there for 6 years. Can you tell me maybe a couple of changes other than obviously physically? You actually had an office that belonged to MDS. Were there other changes that were major during that time period that you recall?
One of the biggest challenges was administratively. Anytime there was a disaster, constituents still thought it was MCC. MDS had to tell the folks we're independent, to say it bluntly, send us the money and don't send MCC the money. Although MCC was very gracious. Don't take that wrong. You know, if there was a tornado or hurricane, money went to them, they transferred the funds to us. But educating the constituents and others that we are an independent organization and need your volunteer support and funding and all that, that was a major task. You don't have that these days. I mean, we're way past that now. So And the other thing was on the national scene, Lowell took MDS as part of the NOVAD, the national umbrella agency over volunteer agencies. NOVAD would be NVOAD, National Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. And I kind of continued that relationship. And so I became an officer in that, which we grew that. At that point, we didn't have any staff. That was all volunteer. I helped add one staff person to that. And now I don't know how many they got. They got rooms full. So, it was a period of a lot of growth in disaster response, a lot of growth nationally and within MDS. We added staff. We did keep getting a little more funding and was able to add some staff. I had two great volunteers that went out and did a lot of the initial investigations for me, site investigations. Yeah, it was a period of growth.
And major transition, too, as you were saying.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We started doing our own communication. That's when email was starting up in the early 90s and 98. The website, we had to develop all that. Oh, yeah, that was a growth period. And you're talking to a guy that has no experience in that, none. So relied heavily on my staff. Databases, all that was being developed at that point.
Moving things from paper to computers, those kinds of things.
While I was there, one of my staff people, Ted Hauser, developed Behind the Hammer, the magazine. So, yeah, there was a time of growth. Growing up, I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as exciting times, challenges, taking a good organization and trying to make it into a bigger and better one. That was a great challenge, and had great people around us to work with, and it was good times. It really was. Lowell, great guy to work with. Can't say enough. So, yeah, I'd do it again.
So what happened? After 6 years, you were ready to move on, or how was that transition?
I was ready to move on. Yeah. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. Great people to work with, really had no issues. Administrative work of desk nature is not in my DNA. So it was time to get some better folks in there.
And Kevin King came next, the current executive director.
Correct.
So as we're finishing up, you've obviously given much to MDS. What have you received from MDS?
Oh, lots of wisdom. Lots of wisdom, lots of exposure, gratefulness of other people. Learned that there's a lot of other good agencies out there. I work very closely with Red Cross folks. Salvation Army was one of the major players back then. Of course, worked with FEMA, all 10 regions. Yeah, Southern Baptist, all those nonprofits. Sometimes we Mennonites think we pat ourselves on the back doing such great work, but there are other organizations that really do good work. And one of the things that happened in the 90s with these agencies is instead of an agency feeding, cleaning up, construction, childcare, all those different niches that come under disaster response, organizations kind of picked their expertise, and MDS obviously did the construction side. And so we really moved to early response and focused on buildings, construction, that kind of thing. Southern Baptist came into food with their food vans, their trailers. I mean, they did an outstanding job. Salvation Army, they had money. They gave us money. Everybody kind of had a niche. somebody did childcare in those early days of a disaster. And so that was a growing period. We had to learn to work together, and that worked out really well because that's the way it is today. And that's where NOVAD really played an important role, because that was the umbrella organization where we would all meet. And so when you met on a disaster site, it wasn't the first time.
Do you still volunteer with MDS at this point in your life?
No. After numerous phone calls from Kevin, I went back and I worked 6 more years for MDS. And 2 years ago, I had health issues and finally said that's enough. So I kind of go in 6-year blocks, 6 years with Lowell, 6 years on my own, and 6 years with Kevin. And those last 6 years was tremendous change in MDS. They grew their staff. They went from, rocks, one and two, and then they had one for each region, and then they added staff to the rocks. And, oh, my goodness. It just changed dramatically.
And what's rock?
Regional operational coordinators, I believe.
On behalf of MDS, thank you for your many, many years of service. It's greatly appreciated by everyone, I'm sure, that you interacted with.
Well, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't have done it.
Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to share some of your stories with us. Much appreciated.
Yeah, those are early ones that a lot of people know about. I mean, you can read the book, old book. So, yeah, he did an excellent job on those early years.